Hello, good morning, everybody. This is Mike Parsons here from Universum. Look, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We know you're all extremely busy people. We really appreciate your time. So we're going to take about probably 40 to 50 minutes of your time this morning just to revisit one of the absolute best reports, I think, from earlier in the year. So we released this in Q2 2018, the must-know student recruitment trends. It was a collaboration between Universum and Oleeo, and yeah, we just want to go back, pick up some of the highlights from that and just share the information again. So as you can see from this slide, there's going to be two of us today. Myself, I'm the head of brand activation for the region for Universum, and our dear friend Samir, who I'll let introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I am Samir from Oleeo, Samir Khalil from Oleeo. Thank you very much for joining us, as Mike said. I have been with Oleeo for probably 20 years now, and 3 years in the region, and still learning, discovering the joys and wonderful things that take place in APAC. So without any further ado, I'm going to start the presentation. And so moving on to next slide. Mike, okay, perfect, great. So the Oleeo, who we are. Oleeo was created 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. Some of us might know us as WCN, World Careers Network. We went through a rebranding exercise last year. And we do talent acquisition tools. We've been doing so for quite a while, and we have clients spanning all around the globe, 146 countries. We currently have over 400 employers using our solutions, and we specialize on campus recruitment as well as volume hiring. We have here a few examples of organizations who use us, quite a few financial organizations, including limited to Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, ICBC International, based in Hong Kong, or organizations such as NBC Universal or Marks and Spencer's. A couple of things we're very passionate about are the candidate experience. We focus on making sure that this experience is as good as possible, and intelligent automations, whether it is through use of sifts, clever ways to ask questions, clever ways to automate the process for recruiters, something that we are quite keen to do. I'm going to now let Mike talk a little bit about Universum.
Yeah. So just quickly with this. So for those of you who don't know Universum, we're the longest running and largest, I think, pure play employer branding organization in the world. So just a very quick bit about us. We work with just over 2,000 brands around the world. You can see some of the different companies there. Most of these we work with in this region. We produce about 1.5 on average EVPs every week. So globally, you can see it's quite a high volume. We survey a lot of talent. I think probably what we're known best for is our syndicated survey. So in about 60 countries around the world, every single year we survey graduates to find out what are their talent preferences, career preferences, their goals for their careers. What are their sort of favorite employers? Why? And then we publish this data market by market around the world every single year. So on the right, you can see some of the media partners we work with in this region for publishing these insights. There'll be a version for all markets, including Singapore and Hong Kong. And that's probably what we're known for best. My side of the business, though, I work on brand activation. So I work a bit more like a traditional branding agency in terms of content creation and publishing. We also have a consulting arm who does more strategic work as well. So that's who we are.
Perfect. So in terms of what the study focused on, we effectively, so Mike and I are going to try and sort of tell you a little bit more about what we did on each side of the coin. Oleeo, we focused on almost 1 million applications across the world. What we're going to be covering today is very much specific to APAC, but it's probably worth mentioning that we've produced equivalent reports in other regions, namely the US and EMEA. So globally, we looked at almost 1 million applications, 117,000 of which focusing on APAC. We looked at a little bit over 200 countries and tried to take examples from organizations in different industries. finance, retail, technology, consulting, and non-profit.
Yep, absolutely. And from the Universum side, I mean, like I said, we survey about 1.5 million students who are graduating every year from around the world, from 60 different countries. Today, we're going to focus on those from Singapore and Hong Kong. So that represents sort of over 20,000 respondents. I mean, both of them are relatively small markets compared to some of the giants we work in, like US, China, India. But these are across all fields of study. And yeah, like I said, we've been doing this for 30 years now, so we've got a lot of historical comparison as well that we think is quite interesting. So that's where our data has been matched up with the Oleeo data to produce some very interesting insights that we're going to go through now.
Absolutely. And I guess when it comes to this, the three angles we took to look at the data. Third one, competition and fallout rates. How are candidates faring through the process? How are organizations selecting them? And what sort of things do we tend to prefer? Gender differences, a topic that's more and more popular, thankfully. So we'll show you how the region is doing in terms of selection and whether or not there is any bias that we have identified. Last but not least, we'll look at where students come from, be it countries or universities. Throughout the presentation, Mike and I will do our best to try and share with you the two sides of the story, really. So Oleeo will focus on the recruiter side of things, whilst Universum will share with you insights into what makes students tick. So, starting off with competition and fallout rates. As we said, we looked at a large portion of applications, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is that employers, recruiters, are really busy. So let me start by sort of sharing a bit of a personal observation. I've worked in the UK, and from there I was covering EMEA. I worked in the US. And as I said in the introduction, it's my third year in apac, and I'm always amazed at how small the recruitment teams are in the region compared to their counterparts in other parts of the world. That being, with this in mind, let's go through some numbers. So we focused on candidates submitting an application. So all the numbers we're going to be showing here are for candidates who have effectively sent their application to one employer or another. Almost 90% of those students were effectively rejected before they reached interview. And Mike, I might need a little bit of help to trigger the animations if you don't mind. So almost 90% of candidates were screened out in one way or another. This number is important. It's very similar to the type of proportions we see in the US. And I guess the difference is that in apac, people still do it very manually compared to other parts of the world. The next number that's worth looking into is around the number of candidates who make it through to interview, which is, well, by deduction, almost 10%, a little bit over 10%. So by interview here, we mean face-to-face interview, assessment center, whatever it is, what would constitute an interview. Out of those 10.7%, 25% reach the stage where they make an offer. So in essence, we reject 75% of candidates before the offer stage. This number in itself, again, is fairly similar with what we've seen in other parts of the world. Only 2%, though, of the candidates offered, of the overall candidates accept an offer. So if you look at it from beginning to end, 2% of candidates who have applied effectively get hired in our organizations. And I think that's the key number to take away in terms of what the competition looks like. The next slide focuses a little bit more on, well, where do we potentially lose candidates? So this very much focuses on candidates that we reject, but where might we lose candidates? And so Mike, if you wouldn't mind clicking to the next one. It's effectively telling us that 2%, 2.6% withdraw at screening stage before screening stage. So candidates who have applied, 2.6% of them withdraw before they get an answer on screening, be it because screening took too long or because they decided not to pursue their interest with the firm. Another 3.4% withdraw at the interview stage, which in itself is, by the way, very small compared to other parts of the world. From memory, in the US, the 3.4% equivalent is 14%. The next two slides are more about what happens during the offer stage, which provides a very different insight. 10.7% decline at offer stage, whereas another 8.1% renege on an offer. So what that means is almost 19% of our students effectively get lost at the offer stage. When you think about it in terms of, the offer stage being, in lots of cases, very close to the last stage of the recruitment process, what that means is we've invested lots of time, effort, energy, and money on those students. Losing almost 20% of them at that stage is not necessarily great news. Another number that we really wanted to draw your attention to, now that we've covered what happens to candidates who've effectively submitted an application. Well, what happens to candidates who don't submit an application? And this number in itself is, in my view, a very large pool of talent that we might want to tap into. Almost up to 30% candidates don't submit an application. So people starting an application but don't finish the application. And what that means effectively is we have here a large portion of candidates that we've spoken to, that we've reached through our attraction messages, but we never really managed to convert into applicants. Some organizations take it as a natural sift, a cost-free way to get rid of candidates who were not convinced. I personally think that there is more to it than that, and we'll come to that in the next few slides. Now, Mike, I believe you were going to be talking to us a little bit about the student sides of that particular question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think this carries on from what you're saying. So people are extremely busy, not just at that stage, but even before that stage. And one piece of data that I think really highlights that is this. Students just have more options now than they've ever had before. And that's not just because there are more and more companies, turning up, like the Grabs and the Redmarts of this world. They just have cross-industry interests now. So how is this highlighted in the data? Well, we saw as we take students through the funnel of awareness, consideration, desire, apply, at the consideration level of the funnel, in 2018, there was an average of 12 employers that students in these markets actually considered. Now, if we fast forward to last year, looking at the entirety of last year's data, that number has more than doubled. And what we know anecdotally, the biggest challenge that all of our clients, come to us with isn't that they're struggling attracting their core talent, the people that, traditionally would apply to them. It's all the people they now want to hire. I mean, businesses are diversifying a lot. We have banks that are going through digital transformations, so they don't want bankers and finance majors, they want tech people. We have professional services firms who are telling us, look, we get the business talent, the creme of the creme applying for us, but we want diversity of thought. We want engineers, we want problem solvers in there. So now what we're doing a lot of work in is trying to help companies attract non-core and non-traditional talent sets, which means there's a lot of noise going out to talent, especially students, showing them that there are opportunities at these companies which they probably hadn't considered previously. And that's really having an impact on how many employers they would actually consider working for, which we're seeing here. And look, this just sums it up. I mean, I mentioned the banking one. This is definitely a hot topic right now. Banks want tech talent, they want engineers. So we asked a special question in last year's survey and asked only to IT students, so only those who indicated they were studying an IT major. We asked them, would you consider working for a bank? 61% said yes, which is way higher than we would have got a few years ago and probably higher than we expected. And, we asked them why, if they said yes or no. And yeah, look, we see some of the things they were saying. They see it as a great place to go a lot of the time. A lot of them are quite savvy. They see that cybersecurity is a big deal, and somebody with their sort of tech background or tech skills would actually do very well in an environment such as the bank. And banks are seen as a good place to work in terms of, growth, professional development, training. So yeah, why shouldn't a tech or an IT major start tapping into that? So yeah, I mean, it's getting harder and harder for recruiters to attract the talent they want from universities, because they are competing on so many more levels now, not just with those in their industry. So what are the things that these students are telling us they want? Well, across Singapore and across Hong Kong, there's quite a lot of synergies. Number one, and we're seeing this actually globally as being one of the sort of the top drivers for talent, is a friendly work environment. It seems crazy. I mean, a few years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were talking about prestige. We were talking about remuneration. Now we're talking much more about the softer side of things, such as the working environment itself, the company culture. And if an employer is really able to communicate what the culture is like, what the sort of the day-to-day is like, in a sort of a softer way, we're seeing very big gains, in terms of their attraction to students. So this is a really big thing, and it's still proving challenging for some companies to sort of articulate and communicate. So here we see what are the top 5 in Singapore and Hong Kong, both topped by friendly work environments. Professional training and development, as you can see, also extremely high. And then as we go down, good reference to future career, 3rd and 4th. High future earnings, 4th and 3rd. So a little bit of variation there in terms of the prioritization for these students, and a clear path for advancement and leaders who support my development. So still a lot of similarities, but that friendly work environment still topping the charts in these markets. Professional training and development, as we saw, that's second. And again, this is almost becoming a hygiene factor now, a little bit like, your salary was in the past. I mean, people aren't really differentiating themselves on salary so much anymore. Students just expect to be paid something similar, across employers. They don't really see it as a big, factor that will influence their decisions so much. And that's kind of the way training and development's going. They kind of expect to be or receive, a high, quality training and development with top companies, in their first few years there. And again, because we're talking about attraction, it's your ability to communicate, how you grow and develop, new recruits that's really helping companies stand out. And all companies have this. And I think a lot of companies are getting kind of hung up on, the classroom training, the technical skills training. But when we ask talent, okay, so what is it you're looking for? When you start researching companies, what do you want to see? We're seeing things like this, mentorships, soft skills training, leadership training, speaking, communications, these sorts of things, especially in the region as well. Professional certification, of course, that comes up, structured development programs. So we're seeing a really diverse range of things. So students just want to know that they're not going to be sort of stuck in somewhere that's going to be a dead end. It's not really going to help them move on to the next place. I mean, you saw good reference for future career in the slide above as being one of the most important drivers. Now, if we look at the companies that's most associated with, it's the companies that are known to sort of upskill and train their people. And that can be through things such as, mobility, departmental mobility, geographical mobility, mentorships, as we mentioned. So there's a whole range of things. So I think an employer's ability to really articulate and communicate this effectively through their channels is really helping them to stand out and attract the best. Things that aren't working so much is attracting the best, actually. So attracting the best is important. Talking about it is a lot less important. The sort of elitism is dying. And, some companies back in the day, some banks that we know, some professional services firms we know, this was their trump card. It's not so important to talent anymore. It used to be in the region 38th behind gender equality and acceptance of minorities. It's now rock bottom in both. And I think that's where it's going to stay for the time being. Interestingly enough, though, we see that gender equality and minorities doesn't rank particularly highly in Asia. When we compare this to some of the other markets we looked at in these studies, especially in the West, those things are a little bit more in vogue and a little higher up the list. Not so much in these markets here. Samir.
Thank you very much, Mike. That's really interesting. I'll share later on some examples of what I've heard students say firsthand at a couple of the events that Universum have actually organized in Hong Kong, where they had panels and where they asked students to elaborate a little bit more on what all those things were. It's fascinating stuff. So now that we've looked at competition and fallout rates, let's focus a little bit on gender difference and diversity. So we are effectively the good news, and there are some. There is good news. The good news is that gender and diversity is definitely a topic that's picking up a lot of momentum in the region, especially compared to what it was 10 years ago. And we now see a picture that's far more encouraging. It's also far more encouraging globally. More organizations are effectively focusing on gender diversity. So what we have on screen is effectively a breakdown of the recruitment process per gender. And I think I'll draw your attention to the first and the last set of numbers here. The first one indicating how many candidates apply and the gender breakdown. The last one being the proportion of candidates who accept an offer, broken down by gender again. And I guess where there is good news is that the numbers are fairly similar beginning to end. What that means is we get, roughly speaking, 60-40 breakdown male-female at application, and we somehow manage to churn out 60-40 breakdown male versus female at offer accepted. So the process in itself, from beginning to end, is very consistent. And I think Asia actually has one of the most consistent processes across the globe. What's interesting is what happens in between. So whilst the beginning and end numbers are pretty much the same, you may notice a slight difference when it comes to candidates reaching the interview stage. So what happens before the interview, which is the screening stage, tends to favor male slightly over female. We have 60% candidates, male candidates starting, and I'm going to use my mouse to point here, 60% candidates starting the application process, 63% of male candidates make it through to interview. Whereas for 39% of female applicants starting the process, 37% make it through to interview. So not a huge difference, but a difference nonetheless. What's also interesting is that female candidates seem to make up for it in the next couple of steps of the process. So we then end up getting 38.66% of female who reach the offer stage and almost 40% accepting an offer. So what that tells us is that whilst the process in itself is fairly consistent, the screening stage tends to favor male candidates, whereas the interview stage favors female candidates. We also notice that female candidates stick with it a little bit longer and tend to accept offers more than male. So we've had lots of conversations with lots of employers, and people, there are effectively two schools of thought. One is, well, female don't have a choice, so they stick with the offers they get. Or at least female feel they don't have a choice, so they stick with the offers they get. Others would say that female candidates tend to know and research their employers before. So once they've made a decision, they're more likely to be committed to it. The answer is probably somewhere in between, but let's see what Mike can share with us in terms of other things in the next slide we will have coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is super interesting stuff. So like what we looked at when we were looking at this gender difference is, well, where do the genders differ the most in terms of what they're looking for, in their ideal future employer? So we looked at the biggest swing in terms of the things they were selecting, that the females were selecting, that males were selecting. So the top 5 things that females were selecting far more than their male counterparts, in Singapore and Hong Kong with these things. So there's a bit of a trend here. So we've got ethical standards, support for gender equality, so no surprises there, a friendly work environment, CSR, and then secure employment. I mean, again, it's quite soft. It's quite sort of ethics based. I mean, and of course, you'd expect to see females favoring gender equality or prioritizing it higher than their male counterparts, because I guess it's more of an issue for them in this part of the world and in others. But look, ethical standards is actually considerably higher than support for gender equality. So, that's why you see a lot of females tending to opt for professions such as healthcare, such as people-related things. Where did the males have a higher swing? Well, look, performance-focused. Innovation, prestige, challenging work, meritocracy. So again, look, I mean, meritocracy and performance focus, I mean, these things are sort of overlapping in a sense. Innovation, okay, that's a bit of a buzz thing at the moment. I mean, when we look at the most attractive employers in the world based on the universal data, innovation is the number one thing they're talking about right now. So in actual fact, they're talking about one of the things that's far more attractive to male talent than we see to female talent when we look at the data. So it's slightly interesting. Maybe they are sort of sleepwalking into creating less gender diverse environments for themselves because they've not looked at the data so thoroughly. Maybe they need to be talking more about their ethical standards if they're seriously committed to rebalancing the workforce in favor of female employees, which some are. Then we look at things like what industries the students actually prefer to work in. So we ask them, and you can see these two shapes are extremely different. So for males, banks, engineering, manufacturing, aerospace and defense. For female, tourism, hospitality, arts, entertainment, media, advertising, healthcare services. So, I mean, if you were about to start to have a debate around pay equality, I mean, already this data doesn't look too favorable towards the female cohort because they're choosing industries that we know don't pay as well as the ones the males are choosing. I mean, engineering, banking, aerospace, I'm sure on average pay a bit higher than tourism, hospitality, arts, healthcare, etc. So again, the story is a little bit skewed sometimes. But what we're definitely seeing, and the advice here I think that I would give, is that diversity on its own, chasing diversity quotas, hasn't really been a good thing for employers to do. I mean, it's quite fashionable to have them right now, but I think what's more important, and certainly what the research shows as being more important, is inclusion rather than diversity. And the diversity quota on its own, I think the research shows that it can be damaging sometimes for an organization, in terms of performance, morale, well-being, slower decision-making, increased conflict, absenteeism, etc., even discrimination cases. But I think when you can couple diversity and an inclusive culture together, then the diversity starts delivering the higher performance that we hear about, the lower absenteeism, customer satisfaction, innovation, etc. And by innovation, inclusion, what we mean is, people feeling part of something, part of the culture, part of their surroundings. So what we've seen is if you are very good within your organization at creating an inclusive culture, so not a forced one, but actually an inclusive mindset, then the diversity that you sort of either chase or are able to create is far much more of a driver for good than it can be a problematic thing. So I think that's extremely worth considering, when you're looking at some of these stats. So just very quickly, 2 more slides on, okay, in terms of career goals, how do talent in Singapore and Hong Kong differ, and how do they compare, in fact, to the US as a sort of a benchmark there? So look, here we are looking at females. As you can see, it's first, second, third, same. So there's actually not a lot of difference there. We see bigger differences when we start to look at perhaps less mature regional markets. When we look at the same data for males, all of a sudden we see some change. So first and second, the same, but actually having an international career is third. Whereas, in Singapore, that's not that important. It's the 7th on this list. For females, it's the 7th, and in Singapore, and 6th for Hong Kong. So again, it's very important to look at the data when you're looking to attract students. in terms of what do you offer as in your career. For example, here, if we were looking at attracting males from Hong Kong, we would know the international aspects of your employment experience would be well worth talking about, especially if you were trying to address a gender balance in favor of males. For example, if you're a multinational, working with international colleagues, international rotations, this would make great content that would help, redress that balance. But of course, that's going to be a lot less effective if you're talking to a male in Singapore who's going to care a lot less about this and be, less motivated by it. Or equally, perhaps a female in Hong Kong or Singapore likewise. So again, it's important to look at the data and see where the differences lie. Samir?
Thank you very much, Mike. So now that we've looked at gender diversity and competition, let's have a quick look at where our students come from. So this is actually quite interesting. When we looked at the universities, we started with the universities. We looked at where applications came from across the panel of employers we talked to. And essentially, 2,068 universities provided us with our applicants. But then when we looked at where hired students were coming from, they were all coming from the top 30 universities. So in other words, if you felt that competition was tough, it wasn't just in your heads. Everybody seems to be going to the same universities, so yes, competition will be tough. The top 10 universities were providing us with 22% of our hires, which again is another version of the previous number, but sort of gives you a feel for what you're up against and how many of your competitors you can expect on campus, or how many you can expect are trying to talk to the same students as you do. The report last year included a heat map, which effectively which we'll come to in a second, but just to give you examples of organizations which are providing us with top students. No real surprises here across Hong Kong and Singapore. I'm pretty sure that if we had organized a game and asked you guys to vote for who did you think the top two were in each country, you would have guessed, and you would equally easily guess who the what the top five would be for both those countries. No surprises at all. The next thing we try to look at is where applications come from, as in geographically, which country they come from. So we received applications from 147 countries, and 30% of our applications actually came from outside APAC. So 70% of applications coming from APAC, 30% coming from outside of APAC. But there again, 11 countries still accounted for 90% of our applications. So the heat map I was referring to earlier, which you can find in the report, effectively gives you a visual representation of where students come from. For ease of use, we've translated that into a little bit of a table showing you what the top 11 countries are. So in orange here, you'll see highlighted the top three. So China, United States, and India are providing us with most applications. To try and give you a little bit of background, interesting thing is the volume of hires. So when we look at, the first number is very much around the volume of applications. So in other words, how have we managed to convince people to apply to one of our schemes? The second one is, well, which one of those countries provided us with students we effectively wanted to hire? So the top remains pretty much the same, except for Japan, which our clients have explained by the fact that essentially when you hire Japanese speakers, the best place still remains Japan. So although it doesn't provide so many candidates, you still have the proportion of hires coming from Japan is still quite big. So it replaces Taiwan as the main provider. So I hope that the previous slide helped to get a little bit of background and data to help you make decisions when it comes to what you'll be doing next year, or maybe what you'll be doing in the longer term. In the meantime, Mike and I were quite keen to try and share with you what we think it all means. So we gave you lots of numbers, lots of facts, lots of things, hopefully, to think about. But what does that mean, and what can be done about it? And Mike, I believe you're going to be starting with some best practice advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think what we've seen here is we're extremely busy. It's extremely competitive. So, what is your best friend in this fight? Well, I mean, no surprises in guessing where I'm coming from. I think a strong employer brand is really going to, make the difference in terms of, how difficult the challenges ahead are in terms of recruiting the best students. And that always starts with your value proposition. I mean, your value proposition should be at the core of everything you do. All of your content, all of your messaging should sort of sing from this same hymn sheet. That way you'll have a very strong brand. If you've used data correctly, you're attracting the right people with things that actually resonate with them. And then obviously you can refresh that, every few years to make sure, your messaging is as strong as it can be. Segmenting your talent data. Again, we saw how important that is. If you're recruiting in Singapore and Hong Kong, you're going to need to say slightly different things. If you're trying to recruit more males or females because of diversity quotas, then again, it's going to really have a big impact on your messaging. So using the data to really understand the different talent segments or talent clusters that you're going after is going to be extremely important. And then tailoring that message around your value proposition to create really compelling content that's on brand and is sort of strengthening your appeal as an employer as you go. Of course, you have to be where talent expects to find you. I mean, we've both mentioned it. Talent now are researching you as an employer, whether that's before they apply or whether that's once they have an offer. They are absolutely 100% going online and digging up as much as they can find. Okay, your careers website, of course, that's extremely important. Some people have extremely awesome best practice career websites that has lots of updated content, lots of stories, chat features, bots or hybrids, so they're capturing talent. Not everybody has that. Some people have, something a bit more basic, a bit more static, but that's fine because social media is there to the rescue if you're using the social channels well, because absolutely talent is looking for you in these places. We spoke about a friendly place to work. Well, Instagram is perfect for showing the soft side of your business. Facebook is good too. LinkedIn, absolutely. Talent's going to look at your company page to see what they can, garner. So yeah, it's really important to be in these places. Like abstaining now, we know is it's not an option. It's going to just damage your chances. So you have to be doing this. And you just have to be showing talent things that are either on brand for you or is going to help make their decision a positive one for you guys. And then finally, and we did have a question come in, so maybe I can sort of tackle that a little bit now. What do you measure? Well, I mean, there's a few things that you're going to measure in terms of, the day-to-day, your campaign metrics, your social media metrics. These will help you to make sure that you're going in the same direction. You can benchmark against industry standards, or I always say the best benchmark is against your previous efforts. Just keep benchmarking against yourself and just keep improving. Of course, if you work with a large employer branding organization like Universum, we have quite specific industry employer branding benchmarks that we can measure against as well. But nobody sets out with the business objective of measuring social media metrics. They're a means to an end. The things that I think are really important here is measuring your brand. So brand equity, brand association. So you can do this through brand assessment surveys that are like for like, held at regular intervals, 6 months, 12 months, just to make sure, are you growing brand equity? Are you more of a desirable employer within these target talent groups now than you previously were? Are you more associated with the things you're talking about? So if you were out there talking about your training and development programs all year, well, has that message sunk in? When we ask talent, what do they associate the employment experience with? Are they talking about training and development more now? They should be. And then, of course, the real hard-hitting KPIs, the business and the HR metrics you should be measuring, time to fill positions, referral rates, your cost per hire. If these things are all moving in the right direction, you can show, a dollar saving, and other nice sort of top and bottom line business metrics. Then of course, that's really going to open the doors to sort of more strategic employer branding in the future. And then just very quickly, when we did ask students in Singapore and Hong Kong what were the channels they used, when researching employers and communicating with employers, very similar. The top three are the same. Social media now for digital natives, it's always going to be number one. Employer website there second, and then third, some offline careers fairs. So it's still important to be, on campus or at careers fairs and meeting people face to face. People are still valuing that interaction. Samir, how about you?
Thanks, Mike. So effectively, we've spoken to employers and we've asked them what did all this mean to them. Examples of what people have said to us. Cedric Blocker from NBC Universal. His key thing is consistency. He's made the point over and over again that the message. So once you've spoken to Universum and Universum have helped you identify what your EVP is, the message needs to be consistent throughout the process. In NBC's case, they had a very specific thing about diversity, and they needed to turn around their they needed to take to massively increase their hires in diversity/gender categories, and they were not able to do that. Cedric had effectively looked at the overall process, and he made that. He took away all the messages. He stopped people from talking about this, that, and the other. He picked one thing that his organization was prioritizing on, and all of the recruitment process was angled towards that. Consistency and focus is what helped them turn around their numbers. We talked to, I don't know to which extent you guys know of an organization called Bright Network. They're a UK-based organization. They surveyed candidates, and on the topic of diversity and inclusion, as well as CSR, and 30% of candidates effectively said that whenever they read anything on a website about diversity or CSR, 30% of them didn't actually believe the firm was serious. The firm actually meant it. They thought it was more of a marketing ploy to attract candidates. Reason behind that was that when the right hand was talking about diversity, the left hand was talking about something completely different. Focus and consistency of message is extremely key. Another point, and that kind of links to what another one of our partners talked about, Gemma Hudson, who at the time of this comment was with Deloitte. She's now rocking campus recruitment for SAP. Gemma's focus is much more on transparency and honesty, effectively to the point that Mike was making earlier. People can research, people can see through to marketing messages. It's not about trying to make things up. It's about having an honest audit of what we as an organization are about and get that message across correctly and without making anything up. The second people will see that something doesn't check out, they will be out. So how can technology help when it comes to this? So I mentioned earlier in the presentation that I attended a Universum event that took place in Hong Kong, I want to say a month ago, which, by the way, I strongly encourage you guys to attend. Those are really great events, great location, amazing content, and they even throw a few drinks afterwards, so never a bad thing to go. When there, the panel of students that was interviewed, they were asked what employer comes to mind in terms of cool events that have been organized. What employers have you seen doing cool stuff on campus? And all students, so the 5 students who were there, all mentioned one particular firm. I'm not going to say who it is. It's a financial organization. They all mentioned one particular firm on account of the great things they were doing around, showing what the office was like, showing doing original things that effectively stuck in their minds. and that in itself is great, and kudos to the firm in question. They really did very well. The one thing that's surprising, though, is that none of those students ended up applying at that firm. One of those students even, four of those students didn't end up applying at this firm. One of those students applied and ended up rejecting an offer. So naturally, I asked the students why this was the case. And again, it's because they felt that the message at the event, between the event and the actual application or throughout the process, was not as clear as it could have been. As a result, it created a little bit of confusion, and another firm that came in with another message managed to attract them. So what that says to us is that engagement needs to be consistent. Engagement needs to be on message and focused. But now, how do we do that when, as we said earlier, teams in APAC tend to be much, much smaller than in other parts of the world? And I hope effectively technology can help when it comes to that. These days, we see organizations focusing more and more on another way to measure ROI. Back to the question that was raised a little bit earlier. Micro-conversion. Micro-conversion is something that people focus on much, much more. So they very much look at, okay, I'm going to an event. There are a couple of very hard KPIs, to quote Mike, that are helpful to look at. How many people attended? How many people made it through to applications? How many people did I hire? There are also other things around cost to hire. There are also other great things like this. But the key question is, which event is helping me recruit what type of student? Organizations like Unilever have said it very well. Effectively, they break down their students in categories, and they break down the conversion in categories. Some students need to learn more about the brand. Some students need to be educated a little bit more about what the firm does. Some students might need more help choosing which program is suitable for them. Don't forget that those guys, if they're looking at 25 different firms on average at the same time, as Mike shared with us, that's a lot of different ways to refer to the same job, lots of different things to learn. So essentially, try to understand what your problem is. Do I have a brand issue? Do I need to get my name better known? Do I need to clarify what this is? I was talking to people that it's no secret that people in the banking industry are trying to attract more women. It's also no secret that people in the fashion industry or maybe the cosmetic industry try to attract more male. So how do I tailor my message, and how do I get it customized, personalized, consistently through to different people in different markets? So one thing, engagement can be massively improved and increased through technology. And what I have on screen is an example of what some of our clients have been doing recently. So thinking about particular event when they're trying to, let's say you're going on an event on January 2019 to promote an internship in August 2019. You go to the event, you meet great people. What happens in between? How do I actually get the conversation going? How do I make sure students know what I'm doing? And how do I make sure that I know what students are about? How do I learn more about them? Well, technology can help sort of structure that for you and provide much more personalized touch than some might think. So first, animation. Mike, do you mind just clicking through all the way? It doesn't matter, like 6 times. Okay, oops. I think they all happen at the same time. So the effectively, what technology can help do is get those interactions scheduled and structured for you. First thing, after the event, the manager who's met a high potential student can effectively receive an email reminding them to give them a call. Next step, why don't I use some of the technology I already have in place? So let's say psychometric tests or games. Gamifications become a much bigger thing now to get people to get students to take a test. They get something out of it, as in they get some feedback on in terms of how they're doing, but you also get something out of it. You get to know to which extent your hunch is validated by technology. Next step, you could get students, you could direct students to a topic of conversation that's dear to them. If you've met someone that's interested in CSR, send them, get them to access the CSR content you've got posted on one of your partners. Quite a few of you guys are using Grad Connection as a means to store some of your content. Alternatively, it could be your own website. Next step, invite them to a video interview. That's a great way to see how candidates are doing without necessarily having to organize an actual interview, which involves traveling and this, that, and the other. Doing a little bit more convincing on your end, more and more organizations are looking at organizing parent outreach events to help. Parents are massive influencers, especially in Hong Kong and Singapore. So that's a great way to get them bought in. Next step, you could decide to organize a hackathon. If we're looking at technical skills, more and more organizations these days use those types of tools to or those types of challenges to check to which extent candidates are right material. Last but not least, get the same manager as we did before to give the candidate a call to effectively close the conversation. Still give them the feeling that, yes, this firm is humane, this firm, you will have colleagues, people will care about you. All those kind of things can actually help quite a lot. And from then, you can then measure how many of them effectively end up applying to your internship scheme that summer. So this is just an example applied to events. Some organizations do something similar for interns, some organizations do something similar specifically targeted to gender. All kind of things can be effectively built to help do that. But that's a great way to effectively leverage technology to make up for the lack of manpower that APAC sometimes suffers from. So that is it.
Okay, I think we're at the end now. So I've just been quickly looking at the questions. I think we've covered a lot of the questions as we've gone. I think people were asking questions which the next slides answered. So if there are any further questions, please contact Samir or myself or both of us directly. So if you weren't able to catch our email addresses at the start and you don't have them already, we're going to send you all of these slides with all of our contact details, as well as the recording of this session in the next 1 to 2 days. We just need a little time to sort of pull the video and make sure it's uploaded and watchable. So we'll send all of that through. We definitely invite further discussion. I mean, we love talking about this stuff. That's sort of all we do. The other thing is, if you haven't done it already, as you can see here, there's a link to download the report. So it's available on the Universum Global website, maybe even the Oleeo website as well. But we'll send you through this link so you can just click on and download this free report, which will be different from these slides as well and have, you know, other pieces of information that you may find interesting. So there's a few things we would totally encourage you to do there as well. I realize we've gone a bit over what we promised, so sorry about that. We're going to wrap up now. So from my side, thank you very much. It was a great session. We were glad you joined. Samir, thanks so much for being a part of this as well and buddying up with us again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mike, for having us. Thank you, everybody, for making time. And as Mike said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And looking forward to meeting as many of you as possible in the future, I'm sure.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you. See you again soon. Bye-bye.